back to the Sheldon Show. So today I'm with Adriana Spiker, did I get that correct? Who's an LPC and a counselor. And I'm going to have her introduce herself a little before we get into today's discussion. So
I'm an LPC intern in the state of Texas. I just want to make sure everything's on the right side of this board. But so I practice here in Texas. I'm in Fort Worth for LifeWorks, and I'm also in Dallas. That is where the main office is for LifeWorks. And how I got into counseling was actually from my own personal interest in psychology. And then I enlisted in the military coming out of college. And I decided on a career in psychological operations in the U.S. Army and deployed twice, once to Iraq in 2007 and then Afghanistan in 2010. And from both experiences, I came back with different concepts of psychology and also different worldviews. So it made me kind of look into more psychology and counseling and kind of what happened to the personal mental health going through the military in that way. Because actually the military is very smart with their training. You train how you fight. So
let's explain that.
So in training in the United States, when you go through military training, even starting at boot camp, they put you under high stress situations to perform. So as you're performing under these high stress situations, your fight, flight, freeze response is going to be activated naturally. So then they condition you through that to perform how they would like you to perform in combat, especially in the combat training. So that knowing that, feeling it, and then coming home from it, I thought I could easily just be able to adapt back. And
was it?
It was not easy. It did not happen that way at all. I felt that it could cognitively be done, like my thoughts. I'm just going to put this over there, and then when I come back, I'm going to take it back out and live my life how I have always lived it. Very compassionate, very grounded.
And so what did you find when you got back? How difficult was it to make that transition?
It was, on the outside, people probably thought it was really easy. They probably didn't see internally what was happening. Close friends noticed I was quick to anger. My family maybe noticed I had less patience with them. I noticed I had less energy. I was very fatigued. I was ready, and I wanted to make up for lost time. So I did very chaotic behavior. And I was in my 20s, so it kind of matched. But it didn't match my internal and my personality. So then I deployed again, because that's also very common in the military. Before you can really reacclimate, you're put onto another deployment. And also that feels very natural and normal. So again, then you go through surviving and living in a fight, flight, freeze condition and environment. And then you go through that cycle again and come home. And in my second deployment, I really lucked out because I already had been doing yoga in my life. I actually got my undergraduate degree from University of Minnesota in Duluth. And in the psychology program, they had us do a personal development course, which had me taking a yoga class for the first time. And that was in probably 2000. So I took the elements of yoga and actually brought it into my military training, breathing and just physical movement. And then my second deployment, we had MWR, which is morale, welfare, and recreation centers. And me and another person, who she is actually a civilian, we started doing yoga classes on base and teaching them to other people, and I had no training or certification. But I found that it was different that time, with having every Sunday going to a yoga class and teaching it, connecting with others, and also connecting with myself for 1 hour a week.
Why do you think the yoga made a difference? So I guess it's the connection with self. Explain that a little bit.
The connection with myself, because I had a role that I was providing to a greater service and to a system. My role as a staff sergeant in the Army and being a liaison in the command center I was at, And that wasn't me. That was the role, and I did it really well, but it wasn't me. I didn't get to have my own opinions, my own likes, dislikes. I didn't really get to, I was performing. I was performing a role all the time. And you're in a war-torn country, so all your senses are alert, and they're heightened. And I was on a 24-hour watch, so there was no sleep. That was the other thing. And then also connection with others is really important. I think through a lot of, if going through any extreme experiences like that, you lose the connection with others because you lose the ability to have that connection with yourself. So how can you connect with someone else? And for me, looking back, and I at the time noticed it was the only thing that really was truly positive through the experience. It was a great experience for me, but everything was tainted, and I had different things going on. So when I came back, I took the training for yoga and became a certified teacher. And then I realized that yoga is actually the only thing that kept humanity for me.
Explain that.
When you're in a war-torn country and you're a soldier, that you perform your duties because they're your duty. It's not your choice. And you see things that aren't for you. They break your heart, but you see them over and over again. And you possibly grew up never being exposed to that. Maybe you saw a little bit of it, but this is like day in, day out, and that's the reality for that period of time that you're deployed. And everyone has their own story through that, but most veterans and active duty military that I've talked to, they connect with that there's something in an act of war that you lose humanity within yourself because you have to perform these acts and you have to witness them.
Not that you think they're right, but you just got to do it. It's part of your job.
It's part of your job. If there was a choice in there, you wouldn't have done that, or you wouldn't have seen that, or you wouldn't have went through a year away from your family. So making that connection with yoga, I started just really becoming interested in the psychological aspects of yoga. And at that time, so it was probably 2011, at that time there was a lot more connection and research coming out with connecting trauma and the use of yoga for any sort of recovery back from a combat trauma. So then I got my master's degree in Chicago at Adler University, and that was, I got the forensic emphasis, but I focused on trauma and using yoga. And then luckily I got a job down here in Fort Worth when I got here in a group of therapists called LifeWorks that have a yoga training program within it, where they do a 200-hour training for psychotherapeutic yoga practitioners. And being a counselor, I use it in the room all the time, and I can say to anyone who's been through trauma that I've been to talk therapy on my own, and it got me so far. But then what yoga did for me was it got me the rest of the way. Because a lot of times we think of like mental health as thinking. We have to change our thinking, or we have to come to a balanced place in our thinking and our feeling. And we leave out the body. The body has been with you since the day you were born. Some memories we don't have, but the body has them. So also looking into Peter Levine, somatic experiencing, helped me think a lot more openly about using body work in therapy, and that we leave it behind. Like we talk through a lot of our problems, and it feels really good, but we don't even notice if the body's experiencing.
So explain to me, as you're going, explain to me the connection from your perspective between the body and the mind.
So, well, there is a connection. The vagus nerve is a literal connection between the body and the mind. It connects behind the ears, and it goes into the major organs, your vital organs in your system. But for me, it is that your body has so much information to communicate, and the mind tries to translate it in a logical way. And it's not always logical, and it's not always in the language you speak. So it could be that you have pain in your, right leg, and you don't know why, and you just give yourself a Tylenol. But actually maybe, like you fell and hurt yourself when you were a kid, and whenever you're feeling really vulnerable, your right leg starts to hurt.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
In subtle ways.
Yeah.
So it's an education between your mind and your body, starting to actually have a relationship and talk to each other and feel familiar, but that's a more comfortable conversation to have. If you're anxious, you hold yourself in a certain way. If you're shy or if you're...
I never thought of that, yeah.
So we often go the way of the mind or the cognitive way. Like you have a thought pattern that's showing up.
Yeah.
But you also walk a certain way. You when you're in a familiar surrounding, you might also stand a certain way. And then on an even deeper level, when you're asked to perform certain roles in your life, you carry yourself a different way. I carried myself as a soldier very different than I carry myself as a therapist walking into a room. And then very different from a therapist to a yoga instructor walking into a room. And then on top of all of them, when I'm feeling like really confident and I'm like in my own space and my self-energy, I walk into a room in a different way.
Interesting. I want to ask you, on your webpage, you talk a little bit about there are different ways that people would deal with trauma. What are some of the most common ways that you've realized that people deal with trauma?
Yeah, so trauma, most common ways that I see it is through addiction. Like you'll find addiction or an obsessive connection to a pattern. So if you, and most soldiers kind of we're constantly asked about drinking and the amount that you drink, and when you come back, they have you do a survey. When you come back from a deployment, they have you do a survey, and if you know the answers they're looking for, so you don't have to give them. Obviously, saying one thing would be a red flag. So drinking is a big one for soldiers, and I think other behaviors that connect with disassociation are pretty common with trauma. And disassociation is when you actually leave your body, and you notice that in a way of disconnection, potentially. So self-harm comes up quite often.
That would be an example of leaving your body.
Of a coping skill from disassociation. If you're feeling very disconnected from your body, and you just are numb a lot, you might self-harm in some way so you can feel again. I see what you're saying. Yeah. So, or drinking could also be connected with that. And disassociation is really commonly used in psychology, but I don't know if it's pretty common knowledge in everyday conversation. But it's a coping skill that you had in the moment of a trauma, and maybe even following it, or if you had a childhood of trauma, it could be more of a constant state that you're in, of just being able to be outside of you.
Explain a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit more about what happens in your childhood and then how that transfers to an adult, because a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of the things that happen in your childhood, it stays with you. I hear people 40s, 50s, 60s, sometimes still talking about their parents and something that happened, and they don't realize that you're still holding on to that, and that's one of the reasons. Talk a little bit more about that and your experience you have with that.
It is really interesting. Everyone has a concept of themselves that they created from their childhood.
Yes.
So that's really what it is for me in my therapy, because I also try to work in the here and now and be a lot more present in what the current problems are. So I don't need to sit and talk with somebody through every event in their life. I need to understand what they're holding on from that happened as a kid today. And that is, the 50-year-old that had an event happen that they believed they are unlovable. And now, 48 years later, they still believe that, and they only look for events and things in their life that confirm it.
Interesting. Yeah. Or people.
And unknown
with the
to them.
yeah.
And people.
Yeah.
And people that confirm it for them.
So is that person then perhaps more likely to enter into a relationship with someone who confirms the thing about themselves then?
Yes. Yeah. We get into relationships with people we feel we deserve. Even,
that's a big
unconsciously.
Feel you deserve,
and it's unconscious.
Yeah.
It's not actively looking for abusive people in your life or people that mistreat you. And that's part of the therapy that could come up for somebody while talking, and also getting into what that feels like in your body. And an 8-year-old making a decision about their life is maybe no longer helpful for someone who's in their 40s or 50s.
Yeah.
And they have more tools and assets. So really looking at what were the events, what was held in that memory that brought them to the self view and the world view that is maybe no longer accurate for them.
One of the things I teach in my communication classes, and I stress a lot, is the whole idea of self-concept. How do you see yourself? And obviously self-esteem, self-worth. What role does that play into the discussions you have with people that you're talking to? This whole idea of self.
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation because we don't really know always who we are.
I tell people that.
And when I see somebody who's maybe suffering pretty severely from some mental health issues, that's the biggest issue, is who am I?
Yeah.
And then
struggling to find identity.
Yeah, and speaking to the military again, like that's the big crisis at the end of a military career, or coming home from a deployment. Because
after you've seen so much, done things you didn't want to do.
And sacrificed who you were to do them, or to do that job.
Morals aside, and your principle.
Yeah, so then if I am no longer a soldier, who am I? And then if I can't answer that question, I don't know how to act.
Yeah.
So to take those, I really like to do different activities with them, but one activity is like a mask activity where you have all these masks you put on for everyone else in your life.
I call them a facade.
Yeah, you put on a facade for everyone else, and that tells you how to act in that situation. But how do you act when no one else is around? Yeah. And when someone's really struggling with that one, then it's a lack of that self-identity, or knowing how to be with themselves, which is also another good experience with yoga.
Yeah. Everyone that I work with for life coaching and all that type of stuff, I always tell them you cannot run from yourself. Some people would say, well, I'm going to move from the neighborhood, or I'm going to do that. And well, that's fine. I think that's useful. Yeah. Sometimes you need to change your environment, your scenery, your neighborhood. But you can't move from yourself, right? I mean, you've got to be able to deal with. So what kind of conversations do you have with people as far as dealing with the internal, those struggles that you're talking about, those identity issues?
There's a phrase or a quote, wherever you go, there you are.
I like that. I've never heard of that.
It really speaks to, an environment can really lift somebody up who's being pulled down by certain toxic people in their life or situations. But if you have anxiety and then you move to another state, you're probably going to have anxiety there as well. That's probably so I encourage, and with a client, I would just really encourage them in most of their life decisions, because they might not have that outside of the therapy room. But I also, so it gives them some maybe empowerment or hope. But I also would want to work with them while they're here, while they're present, on noticing where that comes from for them, and what makes movement an option. Like what makes even addictions options. Yeah.
What are some of the most difficult, or perhaps one of the most difficult issues that you've got to deal with when you're trying to help someone? Obviously without calling names or anything. And what has been more common for you? Some of the bigger hurdles that you have to help people get past before they can heal.
Well, in counseling, the number one issue is suicidal ideation, or thoughts of suicide in action. The gravity of that never leaves me. Veterans themselves being in a very high risk and high population of it, and also trauma, because it just having a self-view that you're worthless.
Oh yeah, self-worth. And I think that goes back to perhaps the reason why the person might accept certain things in a relationship is because they have, I tell my students the most powerful thing you have is the mind, your cognitive thoughts. And I always say, what language do you speak in your home? And I'm not talking about English or Spanish, or what are the words that are used in your home? Because they have an impact on your outlook of life.
So I like working with that a lot with people who's been through trauma, because it's the same thoughts over and over again. So then I try to connect those thoughts with also their physical feelings. So when you continually tell yourself that you're worthless, like how does your body feel? And where in your body are you feeling that?
Oh, I'm not good at anything.
I'm not good at anything. I'm not good enough.
I'm not good enough.
And where are you feeling that in your body every time you say that? Because it's being reinforced not only in your mind, but in your body. And that connecting to both of them and changing that, even to a believable statement. It doesn't have to be, rainbows and unicorns, but it can be believable to you that I'm enough. And then to match the body with it, like in a movement or in just an action that you do to match it up with that cognitive thought.
There's the popular saying, mind, body, and soul, Is yoga the thing that helps? This is just me throwing this out there. Is yoga that thing that can help connect the mind, body, and soul?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is. For me, it absolutely was. I don't think I could have been really, and it's still a journey for me, deal with some of the trauma I've been through if it hadn't been for yoga, because there's not always words, and there's not always an ability to share what it is. But through yoga, through a couple poses, or through a combination of 3 poses in sequence, or going through the poses and then being still, helped me without having to say a word in a lot of ways. I feel like that didn't answer your question though.
Yeah, and it is yoga though, because I've never done it, but
you've never done it?
No. Okay. We're not going to do it on camera. It is, but I do meditate. So I will lay there. So I set my alarm.
So you do yoga.
So that is yoga. Okay. Well, my pose is usually laying on my bed when I get up.
Good pose.
And for like 5, so I'll set the alarm for, let's say 7, and then I'll set it again for 7:15. But when it goes off at 7, I don't get up. I lay there and I just think, I process everything through my mind. And the second time is, okay, now I need to get up and start getting ready.
So I'm not a yoga scholar, but I have practiced for a long time. And actually, yoga is not poses.
See, my ignorance.
No, I think that's common, and I think there's a lot of people out there that are practicing yoga that believe the same thing or think the same thing. But actually, the practice of yoga is pretty dynamic, and meditation is kind of the goal.
Okay.
So the poses are just one facet of yoga that gets your body ready to sit. In a simple term. So it really, the breath is another big part of it, movement's a part of it, but being able to be still with yourself.
Hear yourself breathe.
Hear yourself breathe. Hear yourself think without attaching to those thoughts. Like the thoughts can happen and they can go, and that's also a big part in psychology is, you aren't your thoughts. You're not, if you don't attach that thought and follow it to the next one, it didn't hold any weight. It doesn't define you.
I feel like whatever goes through your mind consistently, that is who you are. It's kind of like the logic of, the way I've always tried to make sense of that. I feel like we are our thoughts in a lot of ways. If I'm always thinking negative, chances are I'm either going to have some negative stuff going on in my life, or I feel like it's kind of like an energy type of thing. And the person who's always negative. Another thing I always tell students or anyone that I work with for life coaching is, if you want to be successful, you have to think that way. And it doesn't mean that the successful person doesn't have thoughts that are sometimes, opposite of what they should be thinking, but those are not the main thoughts that go through their head. And somehow they're able to work through whatever negative stuff might come to their mind and go on to the stuff that's positive.
Yeah.
Is that a lot in terms of, do you do a lot of that in your...
I look at it as, well, it's definitely cultivating a life.
Yes.
Your thoughts.
Yeah.
And getting you on a road to a goal. So I think of it as that you view yourself in a certain way, and then you view people in a certain way, and then you view life in a certain way, and from those three things you behave. So we look a lot of times at changing behavior.
Yeah, behavior modification,
right.
That's a term.
But if you go back to how you actually were talking to yourself, that's influencing your actions,
your behavior.
And also, especially speaking with trauma, how you view people and how you view the world are typically drastically affected by trauma. And that's what is a trauma. If you go through an earthquake and your view has not shifted or changed, then you don't possibly view that earthquake as a trauma. But if you've never had your life threatened before and you go and an earthquake happens and now all of a sudden the world is unsafe, that earthquake was a trauma for you.
Interesting.
Because now you're going to behave differently. And also, I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that, but that's how I look at trauma. Then also how you view yourself is different. And that also goes back to that 8-year-old making a decision and keeping it.
And keeping it when you're 40-something years
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me about, generally speaking, the services you provide as we're kind of wrapping up now. So that, because I'll post your information as well if anyone wants to get in touch with you, so you can share that with.
Okay, that went so quick.
Yeah.
So I am a counselor. I do EMDR as well, and psychotherapeutic yoga along with trauma counseling, and I work with veterans and active duty military and with addictions. I work in Fort Worth at LifeWorks, and I also, there's an office in Dallas for LifeWorks, and I also teach at the yoga training, which is called LISPY, which is Lifeology Institute for Psychotherapeutic Yoga. I think I said that incorrectly, but it's also on the webpage. And we teach a 200-hour yoga there. And I also do just yoga classes in Fort Worth and in Dallas. It's great to try, even if you've never tried it before. But it might, it's a slower paced yoga, because if you go into a yoga class that is geared towards affecting you psychologically, you're going to change your physiological state. So if you go into it feeling depressed, you're going to leave a little bit less depressed. Most yogas would do that, but that's not what they're aiming at. You can go into a flow yoga anxious and leave more anxious.
Well, thank you again for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and I will post all of her information, contact information with the video as well, so you'll be able to get in touch with her. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much.